and good evening, and welcome back to the Dusty Feet. It's June 16th, 2026, and we're continuing our discussion collection in our Outside the Class series. This series follows the work of the Bible Project as we journey through this TaNaK, the Hebrew Bible. You guys know it as the Old Testament. The source videos that are available for your review, they're on TheDustyFeet.com in that Outside the Class section. Because the purpose of Outside the Class is kind of simple. First, watch that short overview video for each scroll, the in-class lesson, and then here we continue this discussion. We just slow down, zoom in, ask questions, explore details, connect ideas, and often we discover that some of the passages that we're just more tempted to skim. They just might contain some of the deepest ideas in Scripture. So tonight, we arrive at 1 Kings chapter 7. So let's sit back. We're going to relax together as we begin this exploration on the Dusty Feet. Our hope with the Dusty Feet is to foster discussion and to help build and support communities. If you're not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. DustyFeet.com. That's our primary place for everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Substack. Link is in the description below. Designed around the written and spoken text, it's a place to connect to ourselves and others. 3. Facebook at Dusty Feet Journey. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. And as always, 4. You're welcome to send an email to Bob at TheDustyFeet.com. These places, they will be moderated and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. Before we jump in, just a short reminder, if you find these discussions useful, that's when you please click the subscribe button. But if you think someone else might enjoy exploring the scriptures just the way we do, it's when you hit that like button, because it really does help us. It helps more people discover this series on YouTube. Okay. And also remember, the videos we're going to discuss, they're only the tip of the iceberg. They are part of a much larger learning series from the Bible Project, and I highly recommend spending time either in their app or on their website. Because along this road, we're going to ask a lot of questions. Questions about the text, its context and history, about people, choices, patterns, meaning. Yeah. The answers? Well, let's see where the dusty path leads. So, Kings, first scroll, part 9. Preparation for this, please go read 1 Kings chapter 7. Okay? Because if we're honest, at first glance, this chapter can maybe feel a little dry, right? Lots of measurements, construction details, descriptions of buildings, columns, basins, decorations, bronze furnishings. Things that might maybe tempt us to just skim ahead. But as we've discovered many times before, Scripture often hides these treasures in some of these details. In chapter 7, well, it might be one of those places. Because I tend to think that this chapter is not really about just architecture. I think it's about something bigger. It's about what happens after someone's vision, well, it becomes reality. Because chapter 6, it told us Solomon spent 7 years building the temple. And then chapter 7 begins with an interesting contrast, right? It said Solomon then spends 13 years building his own palace complex. So immediately, right, some readers, they're going to become uncomfortable with that. 7 years for God's house, 13 years for Solomon's house. What do we do with that, right? So there are some commentators, they see this as a subtle warning. Fair. But there's others that simply point out that Solomon's royal complex was just much larger than the temple was itself, even its complex. The text, it doesn't directly condemn Solomon, but I think it does invite us to note the comparison. Take notice. That's something Scripture often does. It lets us draw conclusions rather than telling us just what to think. You know, Messiah did this often in his parables too, right? Here's the story. Think about it. Okay? So one of the fascinating things about First King with Solomon, right? At this point, he's still being thought of as wise when we're here, but small clues, they're beginning to appear. Tiny cracks, subtle hints. There's nothing really dramatic yet, just little observations that might cause us to pay attention. And then throughout the rest of Solomon's story, those small observations, well, I think they're going to begin to matter. So for now, just tuck that thought away in the back, maybe put it in a box on the shelf, because we know the Bible often teaches through patterns, right? And patterns, well, sometimes they begin small. Or we're remembering that maybe we just might not see them yet. So don't forget. So building a dwelling place, or the two place says, but the temple's been completed, right? Chapter 7 reminds us that building the temple, though, it wasn't the end goal. The temple was not a destination, right? It's a symbol. It's a physical reminder of something that's much greater, right? That this is a reminder of God's desire to dwell amongst his people. That theme, that's all the way back at Eden. Because think about it, in Genesis, walks with humanity in the garden. He's present, close, accessible. There's no temple because there's no separation. Or, then again, maybe it is in and of itself a temple. That's something to ponder. Thought for another day. Let's move on. But after that comes our rebellion, right? The exile, distance, the story changes. But later in Exodus, God then instructs Israel to build the tabernacle, this portable sanctuary, this beautiful tent. It's a place where heaven and earth symbolically overlap. So now, the vision of David, under the tutorship of Solomon, that tent, well, now it is going to become a permanent structure, right? The temple. But the purpose, it reigns exactly the same. God's dwelling amongst his people. The building itself is never the point. The relationship and what it points to is. And I think that may be one of the more important reminders for us even today, because humans often become attached to structure and or structures, yeah? Because we like our church buildings, we like our religious institutions, we like our church programs, we love our traditions. Yet Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God is after something deeper. It's not merely a building, he's after a people. It's not merely structure, right? He wants relationship. And then inside of all of that, enter Hiram the craftsman, right? So a bit of the chapter 7, it does focus on this man named Hiram, not King Hiram from Tyre. We talked about him. This is a different guy. This is a master craftsman. This is a worker that's skilled particularly in bronze. The gift that the text, it gives him significant attention. And maybe it's enough attention that we should probably ask why. Why spend so many verses talking about this metalworker? Maybe it's because the Bible sees craftsmanship differently than we do, right? We saw this with let's see, Bezalel, Oholiab when the tabernacle was built, yeah. But in modern culture, spiritual work and practical work, they're often separated. Pastors are doing God's work, right? Missionaries are doing God's work. Teachers are doing God's work. But craftsmen, builders, designers, metalworkers, and I think sometimes we unconsciously place those roles into a different category. We just notice in Scripture, it doesn't. In fact, the first person specifically described as being filled with God's Spirit, it's in the Bible. It's not a prophet. It's not a king. It's not a priest. It was Bezalel, right? It was that craftsman who built the temple. His skill was viewed as a gift from God. His creativity was sacred. His craftsmanship, it was worship. And I think now we see something similar with Hiram, right? His abilities are not treated as secondary. They are essential, and the temple could not become what it was intended to be without the work of him and the work of the gifted people around him. Because I think that's worth noting. It's worth reflecting on. Sometimes people wonder if their daily work matters to God. The accountant, the mechanic, the artist, the carpenter, the programmer, the technician, a nurse. And I think chapter 7 quietly answers the question. Yes. Yes, God's gifts, the gifts that God gives, places within people that He gives, that He puts them there, they matter. Those gifts can become part of something that is much larger than themselves, and they might not even know it. Yeah. Then we talk about beauty, right? One thing becomes immediately clear in this chapter. It's obvious, right? The temple wasn't merely functional. Just like its predecessor, the tabernacle, it's beautiful. And here, just the palette's larger. It's different, right? The pillars are decorated. The basins are decorated. The walls contained artistic imagery. The furnishings inside were elaborate. There was literally beauty everywhere. But sometimes I ask the question, have you ever wondered why? Why not just build something simple? Why not just focus on it being functional? It's utilitarian, yeah? But maybe because beauty has always played a role in creation and in worship. Yeah, beauty reminds us that that utilitarian survival, well, it's not the highest goal of life. Because humans long for meaning, they long for wonder, they long for creativity. And throughout Scripture, God continually invites humanity to create, right? He wants them to cultivate, to build, to design, to bring order from chaos. And then, in many ways, that creativity, that can reflect the image of the Creator Himself. We kind of hope it does. And maybe perhaps that's why beauty appears throughout the biblical story. Not because God needs beautiful things, but because beauty points beyond itself. It points back to the Creator. It reminds us that there is more to existence than just function. Because then we have those two bronze pillars. This is one of the most famous elements of chapter 7. It's the creation of these two enormous bronze pillars. Their names are fascinating. Jachin and Boaz, right? Jachin roughly means he establishes, and Boaz, in him is strength. So think about the names. They stand at the entrance of the temple. Every person looking in, passing through, walking by, he sees the two pillars. God establishes and God strengthens. I think it's quite a message, right? Especially for a nation, but especially for a nation that's now, at that moment, it's enjoying unprecedented prosperity. But maybe that's because prosperity can create a temptation. Maybe that's why they're there. We begin believing our success comes entirely from ourselves. We think it's from our intelligence, our effort, our wisdom, our resources. But those pillars, they quietly remind Israel and everyone around of something important, that this kingdom stands because God established it. The nation survives because God strengthens it. The temple exists because of God's faithfulness. So those may be ancient pillars, but they're definitely lessons that we need to make them relevant to us today. We need to make them part of how we think about God in our time. the sea. So there's another striking feature in this enormous bronze basin that's there. Remember, the sea. It holds thousands of gallons of water. The priests used it for ceremonial cleansing, right? But why call it the sea? Because in the ancient world, the sea often symbolized chaos, danger, the untamed forces of creation. And yet, throughout Scripture, God has repeatedly demonstrates his authority over the waters, over the chaos, over the disorder. And so now, inside the temple complex, sits a symbolic sea. It's contained, it's ordered, it's calm, it's under God's authority. So the message seems there that even chaos ultimately answers to the Creator, and it will be reflected in his temple. And I think that's comforting when you think about it, because all of us experience seasons that feel chaotic. Unexpected illness, financial challenges, family struggles, loss, just uncertainty. Moments when life feels out of control. But reading of this temple imagery, it quietly reminds worshipers that chaos does not have the final word. God remains sovereign even over these simple things with the sea and the chaotic waters. Many scholars have noticed, and they should, that the temple itself resembles this miniature creation story. We have gold, trees, flowers, garden imagery, water, light, order, beauty. We have life. Yes? It's as if the temple serves as a reminder of Eden, a place where heaven and earth met, a place where God's presence dwells among humanity. It's a place of harmony between this creator and his creation. So the temple, in its design, it's pointing backward to Eden. But like Scripture, I think it's also pointing forward. It's toward the future hope that God's presence will once again fill all of creation, right? It's one of the fascinating aspects of biblical symbolism, right? Because it often can look in, say, multiple directions at once. It can look backward. It can be in the present. It can move forward, right? Remembering, experiencing, anticipating. And yet, as we move through Solomon's reign, I think there's one question that keeps appearing beneath the surface, right? In all of that beauty, in all of that design, can success become dangerous? Because most of us, it's easy. We recognize the dangers of failure, but Scripture, it also warns about the dangers of prosperity. When things go so well that people often they think they should become self sufficient, complacent, proud, forgetful. And at this point in the story, everything right now, it appears magnificent, right? The temple is complete. The kingdom right now is wealthy. The nation right now is stable. The future looks bright. And yet, as readers that we are, the rest of the story, because we do cheat that way, intentionally or not. So as we aware of that, we feel this tension knowing the story, right? Because we know that this external success, it it doesn't guarantee the internal faithfulness that needs to happen, right? A beautiful temple, it cannot substitute for a faithful heart, right? A prosperous kingdom cannot replace obedience. And a strong economy, right? It can't sustain a weak spiritual foundation. Yeah, those lessons, they're not limited to just ancient Israel. They remain relevant today. They remain relevant for individuals, for families, for churches, for communities, and yes, even for nations. So as we wrap it up, chapter 7 leaves us with several points to ponder amongst ourselves, right? First, God values the gifts and talents he places within people. So craftsmanship matters, creativity matters, excellence matters. The work of our hands can become an act of worship in and of itself. Maybe second, beauty has a purpose, but it's not vanity. It's not excess, but beauty that points us toward wonder, right? Beauty that reminds us of the Creator. Beauty that lifts our eyes, well, beyond ourselves. And third, maybe the temple, as the tabernacle for the wanderers was, they remind us that God's desire has always been a relationship. Buildings come and go, structures rise and fall, but God's purpose remains the same. He wants to dwell amongst his people. He wants to be part of his creation. And I think finally, chapter 7 quietly reminds us that success, that's not the goal. That never has been. Faithfulness, that's the goal. The temple could be magnificent. The kingdom, it can be prosperous, but ultimately, underneath, there's a question that's still there, right? Will people remain faithful to the God who gave them these blessings? Perhaps, I guess that's just a good question for us, right? Not merely what have we built, right? It's who are we becoming, right? Not what we've accomplished, but are we still walking faithfully with God? So thank you for joining me on this episode of The Dusty Feet. Next time, we're going to move into 1 Kings chapter 8. Now, it's one of the most significant moments in Israel's history. We hit the dedication of this temple, and we get to hear Solomon's remarkable prayer. So until then, keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep walking down the dusty roads of Scripture. And as always, shalom, shalom, and keep walking with Dusty Feet along the journey.